Sharon Williams had perfected the art of being invisible in Millfield, a quiet town nestled between rolling hills and endless farmland. At 34, her brown hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her hands showed the honest wear of someone who worked with tools every day. She drove a 15-year-old pickup truck that had seen better decades, and her work clothes were clean, but clearly well used. For 3 years, she had run Williams Electric from a small shop on the edge of town. The storefront was modest, with hand-painted signs advertising residential and commercial electrical services in simple black letters. Most of her customers were local farmers needing barn wiring, homeowners with electrical problems, and small businesses requiring basic maintenance work. What none of them knew was that Sharon held a master's degree in electrical engineering from Stanford University. She had once designed power systems for major corporations, worked on projects worth millions of dollars, and solved problems that stumped teams of experienced engineers. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now. The fall from grace had been swift and brutal. 5 years ago, she had been Sharon Williams, senior electrical engineer at Titan Industries, one of the country's largest energy companies. She had discovered that her supervisor, Director James Morrison, was approving electrical systems that didn't meet safety standards. When she reported the violations to upper management, Morrison had turned the situation around, claiming that Sharon had been the one cutting corners to save money. Morrison had connections throughout the industry. Within months, Sharon found herself blacklisted from every major engineering firm. Her reputation was destroyed by whispered rumors about unreliable work and poor judgment. Companies that had once competed for her expertise suddenly wouldn't return her calls. The legal battle had drained her savings. Morrison's lawyers painted her as a disgruntled employee trying to damage the company out of spite. The evidence she had gathered mysteriously disappeared from company servers, and witnesses who had initially supported her claims suddenly developed selective memory loss. In the end, Sharon had chosen to disappear rather than continue fighting a system designed to protect those with power. She changed her name legally, moved to Millfield, and started over as a simple electrician. The work was honest, even if it didn't challenge her abilities. She found peace in solving straightforward problems without office politics or corporate corruption. Her customers appreciated her reliability and fair pricing. Mrs. Henderson, who owned the local diner, always recommended Sharon to anyone with electrical problems. "That Williams girl knows her stuff," she would say. "Fixed my kitchen outlets for half what the big companies wanted to charge." Sheriff Tom Bradley had become something of a friend over the years. He often stopped by her shop for coffee and conversation, treating her with the respect that came naturally to him. He had no idea that the quiet electrician who fixed his patrol car's emergency lights had once designed power grids for entire cities. Sharon's daily routine was predictable and comforting. She opened the shop at 7 each morning, reviewed her schedule over coffee, and headed out to handle the day's calls. Most jobs were routine, replacing outlets, fixing circuit breakers, or installing new fixtures. She worked methodically, taking pride in craftsmanship even when the tasks seemed simple. The only hint of her former life was the small workshop behind her shop, where she had built a sophisticated testing laboratory. Using equipment she had quietly acquired over the years, she could analyze electrical problems with precision that would have impressed her former colleagues. But she kept this capability hidden, presenting herself as a competent but unremarkable local electrician. On quiet evenings, Sharon sometimes pulled out her old textbooks and technical journals, reviewing advances in electrical engineering that she could no longer participate in professionally. The knowledge was still there, sharp and ready, but she had learned to be content with smaller applications of her skills. The peace of her carefully constructed life was about to be shattered by the arrival of someone who would force her to choose between safety and principle once again. The invasion of progress. Direct Tech Industries announced their arrival in Millfield with the subtlety of a marching band. Construction crews appeared overnight, transforming the old Patterson farm into a gleaming technology campus complete with glass buildings, satellite dishes, and enough electrical infrastructure to power a small city. Marcus Kane, Direct Tech's CEO, held his first town meeting at the community center on a Tuesday evening in October. Sharon attended out of curiosity, sitting in the back row while Kane presented his vision for bringing Millfield into the digital age. Kane was everything Sharon remembered disliking about corporate executives. He wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people in the room made in a month, spoke in buzzwords about synergistic partnerships and technological innovation, and treated the local residents like children who needed his wisdom to understand progress. Direct Tech will create hundreds of jobs, Kane announced, clicking through a slick presentation on his laptop. We'll transform this sleepy farming community into a hub of 21st century innovation. Of course, we'll need to upgrade the local infrastructure to meet our requirements. During the question and answer session, several residents expressed concerns about the impact on their rural lifestyle. Kane dismissed these worries with condescending smiles and vague promises about managing growth responsibly. When elderly Mr. Peterson asked about increased traffic and noise, Kane replied, "I understand change can be intimidating for folks who aren't used to modern business operations. We'll do our best to minimize any inconvenience." Sharon felt her jaw tighten at Kane's tone, but she remained silent. She had learned the value of staying invisible when powerful men were displaying their importance. After the meeting, Kane approached several local business owners, including Sharon. His handshake was firm and calculated, designed to demonstrate authority rather than friendship. "Williams Electric, right?" Kane said, glancing at the business card she handed him. "We'll be needing electrical work done at the campus. Simple stuff mostly. Outlet installations, basic wiring, that sort of thing. Think you can handle it?" The way he said simple stuff made it clear he viewed her as a local contractor capable of only the most basic tasks. Sharon nodded politely. "I'd be happy to provide a quote for any work you need." Kane's smile was patronizing. "Great. We'll probably need someone who can follow directions carefully. Our systems are pretty sophisticated, so we'll have our engineers design everything. You'll just need to install what they specify." Over the following weeks, DirectTech's construction project revealed itself to be poorly planned and inadequately managed. Kane had hired the cheapest contractors he could find, prioritizing speed over quality. The electrical work was being done by out-of-state companies that cut corners and ignored local building codes. Sharon watched from a distance as problems began to emerge. Power outages became frequent at the campus, equipment failures disrupted work schedules, and frustrated employees complained about unreliable electrical systems. Kane's response was to hire more expensive consultants and blame the local power grid for his problems. This small-town infrastructure just wasn't designed for serious business operations, Kane told the local newspaper. "We're having to work around significant limitations in the existing electrical systems." The article quoted Kane, suggesting that Millfield's electrical infrastructure was decades behind modern standards and might require complete replacement to support future growth. Sharon recognized the setup. Kane was positioning himself to justify massive changes that would benefit his company while shifting costs to the community. When the hospital experienced its first power fluctuation in over a decade, directly coinciding with DirectTech's operations coming online, Sharon knew that Kane's electrical systems were creating problems throughout the town's grid. The fluctuations were subtle but dangerous, the kind that could damage sensitive medical equipment or disrupt life support systems. Sharon considered calling the hospital's maintenance department to offer her analysis of the problem, but she hesitated. Getting involved would mean revealing knowledge that might draw unwanted attention to her background. She had built her peaceful life by staying invisible, and challenging a powerful corporation would destroy that safety. Instead, she quietly began monitoring the town's electrical systems, using her hidden laboratory to track the fluctuations and power quality issues that were spreading through Millfield's grid. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Kane's systems weren't just poorly designed, they were actively destabilizing the entire local electrical network. The cheap equipment and inadequate engineering were creating harmonic distortions that could cause catastrophic failures in critical systems like the hospital, fire station, and emergency services. The worst part was that Kane's people had to know about these problems. The issues were too consistent and too severe to be accidental oversights. They were cutting costs by exporting their electrical problems onto the community grid, gambling that any failures would be blamed on the town's outdated infrastructure rather than their substandard work. Sharon spent sleepless nights reviewing the data, hoping she was wrong about the scope of the problem. But every measurement confirmed her fears. DirectTech's operations were a disaster waiting to happen, and when it did happen, people could die. The crisis that would force her hand was already building in the poorly grounded systems and overloaded circuits that Kane's team had installed throughout their campus. The art of condescension. Kane's attitude toward local workers crystallized during the first electrical emergency at DirectTech's campus. A power surge had damaged several servers in their main data center, and Kane was furious about the potential cost and downtime. "This is exactly what I was talking about," Kane announced to the crowd of contractors and consultants gathered in the DirectTech conference room. "The local electrical systems just aren't reliable enough for serious business operations." Sharon had been called to the campus along with every other electrician in the area. Kane's facilities manager, a nervous man named Peterson, was trying to coordinate repairs while Kane paced around the room, making pronouncements about small-town incompetence and outdated infrastructure. When Peterson asked Sharon to check the building's main electrical panel, Kane interrupted before she could respond. "Actually, let's have the real electricians handle the important stuff. Williams, you can check the outlet circuits in the break room areas. Make sure employees can plug in their coffee makers without starting fires." The dismissal was casual, but pointed, delivered with the kind of smile that said he was doing her a favor by including her at all. Several of the out-of-state contractors chuckled, enjoying the implied superiority of being chosen for real electrical work. Sharon nodded quietly and headed to the break room areas, but she made mental notes of everything she observed along the way. The main electrical panel was a disaster of poor connections, inadequate grounding, and code violations that would have failed any competent inspection. The expensive consultants Kane had hired were focusing on replacing damaged equipment, rather than addressing the underlying problems that had caused the surge in the first place. While checking outlets in the break room, Sharon overheard Kane talking to a group of his managers about the local workforce. His voice carried clearly through the thin office walls. "The problem with places like this," Kane was saying, "is that people get comfortable with mediocrity. They've never been exposed to real professional standards, so they don't understand the difference between good enough and actually good." One of his managers asked about using more local contractors to save money on the project. Kane's response was swift and contemptuous. "These people are fine for basic tasks, but anything important needs to be handled by professionals from the city. We can't risk our operations on someone who learned electrical work from fixing barn lights and installing ceiling fans." Sharon's hands stilled on the outlet she was testing. She had designed electrical systems for data centers far more sophisticated than DirectTech's simple operation. She could solve their power problems in a few hours, But Kane had already decided that local knowledge was worthless. The pattern repeated over the following weeks. Each time, DirecTech experienced electrical problems, and they were frequent, Kane would hire expensive consultants from distant cities rather than consider that someone local might understand the issues. When Sharon tried to make suggestions during one service call, Kane cut her off with barely concealed impatience. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, Williams," Kane said, "but we've got certified engineers working on this. These systems are probably more complex than anything you've encountered in a place like Millfield." The certified engineers Kane preferred were often less qualified than Sharon, but they carried impressive business cards and charged premium rates for their services. Sharon watched them make elementary mistakes, install equipment incorrectly, and completely miss obvious problems that were causing the ongoing electrical issues. During one particularly frustrating service call, Sharon witnessed Kane's head engineer, David Richardson, completely misdiagnose a power quality problem. Richardson was a young man fresh from college with excellent credentials, but little practical experience. He spent 2 hours and several $1,000s worth of testing equipment trying to locate a harmonic distortion issue that Sharon could have identified in 5 minutes. When Richardson finally gave up and recommended replacing the entire electrical distribution panel at a cost of over $50,000, Sharon quietly approached Peterson, the facilities manager. "Excuse me," she said carefully, "but I think the problem might be simpler than that. The harmonic distortion is probably coming from the VFD units on the HVAC system. If you install proper line reactors, it would fix the issue for less than $500. Peterson looked interested, but before he could respond, Kane appeared beside them. He had overheard Sharon's suggestion, and his expression was a mixture of annoyance and amusement. "Williams," Kane said with exaggerated patience, "I realize you're trying to be helpful, but VFDs and harmonic distortion are pretty advanced topics. Richardson here has a master's degree in electrical engineering from MIT. I think we'll stick with professional recommendations rather than guesswork from local contractors." Sharon felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she maintained her composure. "Of course, sir. I was just trying to save you some money." Kane's smile was condescending. "That's very thoughtful, but expensive solutions are sometimes necessary when you're dealing with sophisticated equipment. This isn't like wiring a farmhouse. It requires real expertise." Richardson, who had been listening to the exchange, seemed slightly embarrassed by Kane's dismissive attitude. He was young enough to still remember feeling overwhelmed by practical problems that textbooks hadn't prepared him for. "Actually," Richardson said hesitantly, "it might be worth checking the VFD's harmonic distortion from variable frequency drives is a pretty common issue in commercial buildings." Kane's expression hardened. "Richardson, I'm paying you to solve problems, not to second-guess your own analysis based on input from local contractors. Are you telling me you missed something that a small-town electrician spotted?" The implicit threat in Kane's voice was clear. Richardson backtracked immediately, his earlier confidence evaporating under the pressure of protecting his professional reputation. "No, sir. I'm confident in my diagnosis. The distribution panel needs to be replaced." Sharon watched this exchange with growing anger, not just at Kane's arrogance, but at the system that allowed incompetence to thrive as long as it came with the right credentials. Richardson was a decent young engineer who might have learned something from considering her suggestion, but Kane's ego wouldn't permit the possibility that a local contractor might know something his expensive consultant had missed. As the meeting broke up, and plans were made to replace the perfectly functional distribution panel, Sharon made a decision that would soon change everything. She began documenting every electrical problem at DirecTech, every misdiagnosis by Kane's consultants, and every code violation she observed during her service calls. If Kane wanted to play games with people's safety and waste money on his own ego, that was his choice. But Sharon had learned something during her years of exile that Kane would never understand. Competence didn't announce itself with fancy degrees or expensive suits. It simply solved problems, quietly and effectively, while arrogance stumbled around making speeches about its own importance. The crisis that would expose this difference was already building in DirecTech's dangerously flawed electrical systems. The price of arrogance. The first major failure happened on a Tuesday morning in November, when the entire DirecTech campus lost power during an important client presentation. Kane was hosting executives from a Fortune 500 company, trying to secure a multi-million-dollar contract when the lights went out in the middle of his PowerPoint presentation. Sharon received the emergency call from Peterson at 10:30 a.m. By the time she arrived at the campus, Kane was in full crisis mode, shouting at his facilities staff and demanding immediate answers. 3 different electrical contractors were already on site, along with Richardson and 2 other consulting engineers he had summoned from the city. "This is completely unacceptable," Kane announced to the assembled crowd of technicians. "We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on electrical systems, and they can't even keep the lights on during a simple business meeting." Sharon quietly began her assessment, while Kane continued his tirade. The problem was obvious to her within minutes. A cascading failure caused by the harmonic distortion issues she had tried to warn them about weeks earlier. The poor power quality had gradually damaged sensitive equipment throughout the building, and the system had finally reached a tipping point where it could no longer maintain stable operation. Richardson and the other consultants were running expensive diagnostic tests and proposing complex solutions that would take days to implement and cost tens of thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, Sharon had identified the root cause and could have had the system running again in a few hours, with parts that cost less than $1,000. She approached Peterson again, hoping to bypass Kane's ego and actually solve the problem. "The issue is in the main switchgear," she explained quietly. "The harmonic distortion from the VFD units has been causing overheating in the neutral conductors. If we install proper harmonic filters and replace the damaged neutral connections, the system will be stable again." Peterson looked relieved to hear a clear diagnosis. "How long would that take?" "About 3 hours," Sharon replied. "I have most of the parts in my truck, and I can get the rest from the electrical supply house in town." But Kane had been watching their conversation, and he strode over with barely contained fury. The failed client presentation had cost him a major contract, and he was looking for someone to blame. "Williams," Kane snapped, "this is not the time for amateur hour. We have real engineers working on this problem, and we don't need local contractors making wild guesses about complex electrical systems." Sharon tried to maintain her professional demeanor. "Sir, I've identified the specific problem and I can fix it this afternoon. The neutral conductors in your main switchgear have been damaged by harmonic currents." Kane's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "Harmonic currents? Do you even know what that means? These are sophisticated commercial electrical systems, not the simple residential wiring you're used to working on." The condescension in his voice was so thick that several of the consulting engineers looked uncomfortable. Richardson, who had been listening to Sharon's diagnosis, seemed particularly uneasy. "Actually," Richardson said carefully, "harmonic distortion in neutral conductors is a serious issue in commercial buildings. If the neutral connections are damaged, it could cause exactly the kind of cascading failure we're seeing." Kane turned on Richardson with the fury of someone whose authority was being questioned. "Are you seriously telling me that this local electrician understands our electrical systems better than you do? Because if that's the case, maybe I hired the wrong consultant."
Richardson's face went pale. He was young, needed the work, and couldn't afford to lose a client like Kane. "No, sir. I'm just saying we should consider all possibilities." The only possibility I want you to consider," Kane said coldly, "is how to get our power restored without taking advice from people who fix barn wiring for a living." Sharon felt the familiar burn of injustice, the same feeling she had experienced when James Morrison had destroyed her career 5 years earlier. Powerful men protecting their egos at the expense of competence and safety, dismissing expertise that didn't come wrapped in the right credentials. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't trapped in a corporate hierarchy where Morrison's political connections could destroy her. She was a small business owner with nothing left to lose, and a community that depended on her honesty and reliability. "Mr. Kane," Sharon said, her voice carrying a new edge of authority. "With respect, I've been working with electrical systems for longer than you might think. The neutral conductor damage I'm describing is a specific technical issue that requires specific technical solutions. Your consultants are focused on replacing expensive equipment that isn't actually broken." Kane's face darkened. "Are you questioning the competence of certified engineers?" "I'm questioning the accuracy of their diagnosis," Sharon replied calmly, "and I'm offering to fix your problem this afternoon instead of next week." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Kane was clearly struggling with the choice between his ego and his desperation to get the power restored. Around them, his expensive consultants continued running tests and proposing solutions that would take days to implement. Finally, Kane made his decision with the petty vindictiveness of someone whose authority had been challenged in public. "Williams," Kane said loudly, ensuring that everyone present could hear his words, "you're obviously out of your depth here. These systems are beyond your level of expertise, and frankly, I'm questioning whether you should be working on any electrical systems in this town." He turned to address the assembled contractors and consultants. "I want everyone to understand that Direct Tech maintains the highest professional standards. We only work with certified, qualified professionals, not local contractors who think they understand systems they've never been trained to handle." The implication was clear. Kane was not just dismissing Sharon's help. He was actively undermining her reputation in front of other potential clients. Several of the contractors who had worked with Sharon for years looked uncomfortable, but none were willing to challenge Kane's assessment publicly. Sharon nodded slowly, understanding that Kane had just declared war on her livelihood. "I see. Well, I hope your certified professionals can solve the problem quickly. A lot of people in this town depend on reliable electrical service." As she gathered her tools and prepared to leave, Sharon made a mental note of every code violation, every safety hazard, and every engineering mistake she had observed at Direct Tech. Kane wanted to play professional destruction games? He had chosen the wrong opponent. The power stayed off at Direct Tech for 3 more days, while Kane's consultants implemented their expensive and unnecessary solutions. When the system finally came back online, it was still plagued by the same harmonic distortion problems that Sharon could have solved in a single afternoon. But Kane had won the immediate battle. Word spread through Millfield's small business community that Sharon Williams had been dismissed from the Direct Tech project for being unqualified and unprofessional. 2 of her regular commercial clients called to cancel scheduled maintenance work, citing concerns about her competence. Sharon responded by doing what she had always done, focusing on excellent work for the customers who still trusted her, maintaining her equipment, and quietly preparing for the moment when competence would matter more than credentials. That moment was coming sooner than anyone expected. The gathering storm. The winter brought new problems to Millfield, and most of them could be traced directly to Direct Tech's operations. The power quality issues that Sharon had identified were spreading through the town's electrical grid like a slow-moving plague, causing failures in sensitive equipment and shortening the lifespan of electrical devices throughout the community. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the hospital's chief administrator, was the first to notice the pattern. Medical equipment that had operated reliably for years began experiencing mysterious malfunctions. The cardiac monitors in the ICU developed intermittent display problems. The blood bank refrigeration units required constant temperature adjustments. Most concerning of all, the backup power systems that protected life support equipment showed signs of stress that couldn't be explained by normal wear and tear.
Dr. Martinez called Sharon to investigate, having worked with her before on hospital electrical maintenance. Sharon arrived on a Friday morning to find the hospital's engineering staff struggling with problems they couldn't diagnose or solve. "It started about 2 months ago," explained Jim Watson, the hospital's maintenance supervisor. "Little things at first, monitors flickering, equipment resetting randomly, but it's getting worse. Last week, we had a ventilator in the ICU shut down for no apparent reason. The patient was fine, but if that had happened during a critical moment..." Sharon connected her power quality analyzer to the hospital's main electrical service and immediately saw the problem. The voltage and current waveforms looked like abstract art, distorted beyond anything that should exist in a properly functioning electrical system. "You're getting severe harmonic distortion from an external source," Sharon explained to Dr. Martinez and Watson. "Something in the area is injecting electrical noise into the power grid, and it's affecting every piece of sensitive equipment in the hospital." Dr. Martinez frowned as she studied the analyzer's display. "Can you trace where it's coming from?" Sharon already knew the answer, but she wanted to document it properly. Over the next several hours, she took measurements at various points throughout the hospital and the surrounding electrical grid. The data painted a clear picture. The harmonic distortion was radiating outward from DirectTech's campus like ripples from a stone dropped in a pond. "The source is definitely DirectTech," Sharon told Dr. Martinez. "Their electrical systems are poorly designed and inadequately filtered. They're essentially turning the entire town's power grid into their personal electrical dumping ground." Watson shook his head in disbelief. "But they hired all those expensive consultants. How could professional engineers design systems that cause this kind of problem?" Sharon considered her answer carefully. "Sometimes expensive doesn't mean competent, and sometimes people in charge make decisions based on politics rather than engineering." That afternoon, Sharon visited 6 other businesses in Millfield and found similar problems wherever she tested. The dry cleaner's equipment was running hot and burning out motors. The bank's computer systems were experiencing random crashes. Even the traffic lights at the main intersection were showing signs of electrical stress. Each business owner told the same story. Equipment problems that had started around the time DirectTech began operations, mysterious failures that repair technicians couldn't explain, and gradually increasing electrical costs as motors and other devices worked harder to compensate for poor power quality.
Sharon documented everything methodically, building a comprehensive picture of how DirectTech's negligent electrical design was damaging equipment throughout the community. The data was damning, showing clear causation between DirectTech's operations and the widespread electrical problems. But she also knew that data alone wouldn't be enough to challenge Kane's operation. He had money, political connections, and the backing of consultants who would never admit to making mistakes that could damage their reputations. Confronting him directly would be pointless. He had already demonstrated his willingness to destroy people who questioned his decisions.
Instead, Sharon quietly began working with the affected businesses to install power conditioning equipment that would protect their systems from DirectTech's electrical pollution. She ordered specialized filters and surge protectors, often absorbing the cost herself, rather than burdening local business owners who were already struggling with equipment failures. Mrs. Henderson at the diner was particularly grateful when Sharon installed filters that eliminated the mysterious problems with her kitchen equipment. "You're an angel, Sharon," she said, as they tested the newly stabilized fryer. "That new company has been nothing but trouble since they arrived." Sheriff Bradley noticed the pattern too. His patrol cars were experiencing electrical problems. The dispatch radio system was unreliable, and the emergency communication equipment at the fire station required constant adjustment. "It's like the whole town's electrical system is sick," Bradley told Sharon when she came to check the sheriff's office equipment. Started right around the time that Direct Tech outfit set up shop. Coincidence? Sharon connected her analyzer to the sheriff's electrical panel and showed him the same distorted waveforms she had found everywhere else. Not a coincidence. Their systems are contaminating the power grid with electrical noise. It's affecting every piece of sensitive equipment in town. Bradley studied the analyzer display with the careful attention of someone trained to recognize patterns and evidence. Can you prove they're causing this? I can prove the electrical problems are coming from their facility, Sharon replied. But proving they know about it and are choosing to ignore it would require internal documentation or testimony from their engineers. Bradley nodded thoughtfully. What would it take to fix the problem? For Direct Tech, proper harmonic filtering and power factor correction equipment, maybe $50,000 worth of electrical components that should have been installed from the beginning. For the rest of the town, I can keep installing protection equipment, but it's like treating symptoms instead of the disease. That evening, Sharon sat in her workshop reviewing the data she had collected over the past several weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Direct Tech's electrical systems were systematically damaging equipment throughout Millfield, costing local businesses thousands of dollars in repairs and replacements. The moral implications were clear. Kane's cost-cutting and incompetent engineering were hurting real people, threatening patient safety at the hospital, disrupting emergency services, and imposing financial hardship on small business owners who couldn't afford equipment failures. But challenging Direct Tech directly would mean exposing herself to the kind of retaliation that had destroyed her career once before. Kane had already demonstrated his willingness to attack her reputation, and he had the resources to make life very difficult for a small electrical contractor who dared to question his operations. Sharon stared at the power quality data displayed on her computer screen, remembering the promise she had made to herself when she fled to Millfield. Never again would she stick her neck out for people who wouldn't appreciate the sacrifice. She had learned to keep her head down, do good work quietly, and avoid confrontations with powerful men who confused authority with competence. But as she looked at the evidence of harm being done to her community, Sharon realized that some fights were worth having, regardless of the personal cost. The data showed clear evidence of negligence that was putting people at risk, and she was probably the only person in town with the expertise to understand and document the full scope of the problem. The crisis that would force her decision was already building in the unstable electrical systems that Kane's team had created throughout Direct Tech's campus. The breaking point. The crisis began at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in February, when a power surge caused by Direct Tech's failing electrical systems triggered emergency shutdowns throughout Millfield's critical infrastructure. The hospital's main power failed, the water treatment plant went offline, and the fire station's communication equipment was knocked out completely. Sharon's phone began ringing at 3 a.m. with calls from Dr. Martinez, Sheriff Bradley, and 3 different business owners whose security systems had failed. She dressed quickly and loaded her truck with emergency equipment, knowing that this was the catastrophic failure she had been expecting for months. The hospital was running on backup generators when she arrived, but the emergency power systems were struggling with the same harmonic distortion problems that had damaged the main electrical service. Dr. Martinez met her at the emergency entrance, her face tight with worry. "We've lost 2 patients to equipment failures in the past hour," Dr. Martinez said without preamble. The ventilator in room 307 shut down during a power fluctuation, and the cardiac monitor in the ICU gave false readings that delayed treatment for a heart attack patient. Both patients survived, but barely. Sharon felt ice form in her stomach. The equipment failures she had been predicting for months had finally caused exactly the kind of harm she had feared. People's lives had been put at risk because Kane's ego was more important to him than proper electrical engineering. "I need to check your backup power systems immediately," Sharon said. If the generators fail, you'll lose life support for everyone in the ICU. Working by flashlight in the hospital's basement, Sharon discovered that the backup generators were operating at the edge of their design limits, struggling to provide clean power in an electrical environment contaminated by DirectTech's harmonic distortion. The automatic voltage regulators were cycling constantly, the frequency was unstable, and the systems showed clear signs of stress that could lead to complete failure at any moment. "How long before the generators give out?" Dr. Martinez asked. Sharon studied the readings on her instruments, calculating load factors and stress patterns. "At this rate, maybe 6 hours before they start shutting down from overload protection. Less if the electrical conditions get worse." Dr. Martinez closed her eyes, mentally counting the patients whose lives depended on continuous electrical power. "What can we do?" "I can install temporary filtering equipment to clean up the power supply," Sharon replied. "It's not a permanent solution, but it should stabilize the generators long enough to get through this crisis." For the next 4 hours, Sharon worked to install emergency power conditioning equipment throughout the hospital's electrical systems. It was complex, dangerous work that required shutting down power to critical areas while she connected bypass circuits and filtering equipment. At 7 a.m., with the hospital's electrical systems finally stabilized, Sharon drove to DirectTech's campus to assess the scope of the damage their systems had caused. What she found was worse than she had imagined. Kane's electrical systems hadn't just failed. They had failed catastrophically, creating electrical disturbances that had propagated throughout the entire regional power grid. The damage extended far beyond Millfield, affecting electrical systems in 3 neighboring towns and causing equipment failures at businesses and institutions throughout the area. Kane himself was on the campus, surrounded by his consultants and frantically making phone calls to his insurance company. The DirectTech facility had suffered millions of dollars in equipment damage when their own electrical systems had turned on themselves, destroying computers, servers, and manufacturing equipment. When Kane saw Sharon approaching with her test equipment, his expression shifted from panic to anger. "What are you doing here, Williams?" "This is private property." "Documenting the source of the electrical disturbances that nearly killed people at the hospital last night," Sharon replied calmly. "Your electrical systems caused cascading failures throughout the region. I have patients on life support, and I need to understand what kind of ongoing threat your facility poses to critical infrastructure." Kane's face went white. "That's impossible. Our systems were designed by certified engineers. Any problems with the local power grid are the responsibility of the utility company." Sharon connected her power quality analyzer to DirectTech's electrical service and showed Kane the readings. The harmonic distortion levels were beyond anything that should exist in a properly functioning electrical system. "These readings show your facility is generating electrical disturbances at levels that violate every power quality standard in existence," Sharon explained, pointing to the wildly fluctuating waveforms on her analyzer. "Your systems are injecting harmonic currents into the power grid that are damaging equipment throughout the region." Kane stared at the analyzer display, clearly not understanding what he was seeing, but recognizing that it looked problematic. Richardson, who had been standing nearby reviewing damage reports, approached to look at Sharon's measurements. "Those THD levels are impossible," Richardson said, studying the harmonic distortion readings. "Total harmonic distortion above 60% would destroy any electrical system." "Exactly," Sharon replied, "which is why the hospital nearly lost life support power last night, and why equipment is failing throughout the community. Your electrical systems are fundamentally flawed." Kane's response was predictable and immediate. "You're not qualified to make that kind of assessment, Williams. Richardson has a master's degree from MIT. If there were problems with our electrical design, he would have identified them." Richardson looked uncomfortable as Kane put him in the position of defending obviously problematic systems. The young engineer had been learning hard lessons about the difference between textbook knowledge and real-world experience, but he couldn't afford to contradict his employer publicly. "Sir," Richardson said carefully, "the readings do show some anomalies that might require investigation." "Anomalies?" Sharon's voice carried an edge of disbelief. "Your neutral conductors are carrying more current than your phase conductors. Your power factor is negative. You have standing wave patterns in your electrical distribution that indicate fundamental design flaws. These aren't anomalies. This is a complete systems failure." Kane's face hardened as he realized that Sharon was demonstrating knowledge that undermined his narrative about local incompetence. "I don't know where you think you learned about power factor and harmonic distortion, but those are advanced engineering concepts that require formal education to understand properly." "You're right," Sharon said quietly. "They do require formal education." Something in her tone made both Kane and Richardson look at her more carefully. Sharon pulled out her phone and opened a file she had hoped never to use again, her resume from before the exile to Millfield. "Sharon Williams, Master of Science in Electrical Engineering, Stanford University," she read aloud. 15 years of experience in power systems design for Fortune 500 companies, specialist in harmonic analysis and power quality optimization for critical infrastructure applications. The silence that followed was profound. Kane stared at the phone screen, reading credentials that were far more impressive than anything his consultants could claim. Richardson's face went pale as he realized he had been dismissing advice from someone whose expertise far exceeded his own. "I designed electrical systems for data centers larger than your entire campus," Sharon continued. "I solved power quality problems for hospitals, airports, and manufacturing facilities. I understand exactly what your systems are doing to this community, and I understand exactly how to fix it." Kane's recovery was swift, shifting from dismissal to aggressive damage control. "If you're really a trained engineer, then you understand liability issues. Making accusations about our electrical systems could expose you to significant legal consequences." "Making false accusations would expose me to legal consequences," Sharon corrected. "Documenting factual evidence of code violations and safety hazards is not only legal, it's my professional obligation." She gestured toward DirectTech's campus, where emergency vehicles were still responding to equipment failures and small electrical fires. "Your systems caused millions of dollars in damage and put people's lives at risk. Every measurement I've taken shows clear evidence of negligent engineering." Richardson finally found his voice. "Ms. Williams, if you're really qualified to evaluate these systems, could you explain what's causing the problems?" Kane shot Richardson a warning look, but the young engineer was more interested in learning from someone who obviously understood the technical issues better than he did. Sharon walked to DirectTech's main electrical distribution panel and pointed to a series of obvious problems. "Your VFD systems don't have proper line reactors, so they're generating excessive harmonic currents. Your neutral conductors are undersized for the harmonic load, causing overheating and voltage distortion. Your power factor correction equipment is incorrectly sized and actually making the problems worse." She continued her analysis, pointing out flaw after flaw in systems that Richardson had approved without understanding their interactions. "Most importantly, you have no harmonic filtering at the point of common coupling with the utility grid. Every amp of harmonic current your facility generates gets pushed onto the community electrical system." Richardson was taking notes, finally understanding why the electrical systems he had designed on paper were failing so catastrophically in practice. "How would you fix these problems?" "Install proper harmonic filtering at the main service entrance," Sharon replied immediately. "Replace the undersized neutral conductors. Add line reactors to all VFD systems. reconfigure the power factor correction equipment to work with the actual load characteristics instead of theoretical calculations. Kane listened to this exchange with growing alarm, recognizing that Sharon was demonstrating the kind of expertise that could expose the full scope of DirectTech's electrical negligence. "This conversation is over," he announced. "Williams, you're trespassing on private property. I want you off this campus immediately." Sharon nodded and began packing her test equipment. "I'll be submitting my findings to the state electrical inspector, the power company, and the hospital administration. People have been hurt because of these electrical problems, and there will be a full investigation." As she walked back to her truck, Sharon felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and apprehension that came with standing up to powerful people who confused authority with competence. She had finally revealed enough of her background to establish credibility, but she had also made herself a target for retaliation. Kane was already on his phone, undoubtedly calling lawyers and political contacts to find ways to discredit her testimony or minimize the legal consequences of his company's negligence. The battle for accountability was just beginning. But Sharon had learned something important during her years of exile. Competence didn't need to announce itself with fancy titles or expensive suits. It simply solved problems while arrogance stumbled around making excuses for its failures. The question now was whether the community would support the truth when it came in conflict with the political and economic power that Kane represented. The reckoning word of Sharon's electrical engineering background spread through Millfield with the speed of social media and the intensity of long-suppressed frustration. By noon, everyone in town knew that the quiet electrician who had been dismissed by Kane as unqualified actually held more impressive credentials than his expensive consultants. Dr. Martinez was the first to understand the full implications. She called an emergency meeting of the hospital board to review Sharon's findings about the electrical problems that had nearly caused patient deaths. "We've been treating symptoms instead of the disease," Dr. Martinez explained to the board members as she displayed Sharon's power quality data. "Ms. Williams has documented that DirectTech's electrical systems are contaminating our power supply with harmonic distortion that our backup generators can't handle." Board Chairman Robert Chen studied the technical reports with the careful attention of someone who understood that liability issues were involved. "Are you saying that DirectTech's negligence caused the equipment failures that endangered our patients?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, Doctor," Martinez replied. "And Ms. Williams has the expertise and documentation to prove it." Sheriff Bradley attended the meeting as both a community leader and someone whose emergency services had been compromised by the electrical problems. "I've seen Sharon's work for 3 years," he told the board. "She's the most competent electrician I've ever worked with. If she says DirectTech is causing these problems, I believe her." The hospital board voted unanimously to file a formal complaint with state regulators and to hire Sharon as a consultant to document the full scope of electrical damage caused by DirectTech's operations. Meanwhile, Kane was discovering that his political connections weren't as protective as he had assumed. The state electrical inspector, responding to multiple complaints about power quality problems in the Millfield area, announced an immediate investigation of DirectTech's electrical systems. Inspector Maria Santos arrived on Wednesday morning with a team of engineers and the authority to shut down any electrical systems that posed safety hazards. Kane tried to use his usual intimidation tactics, but Santos was unimpressed by corporate bluster. "Mr. Kane," Santos said as her team began their assessment, "we have reports of electrical disturbances that have caused equipment failures throughout this region. If our investigation confirms code violations or safety hazards, we have the authority to disconnect your facility from the power grid until corrections are made." Kane's face went white. "You can't shut down our operations based on complaints from local contractors who don't understand sophisticated electrical systems." Santos consulted her clipboard, which contained copies of Sharon's technical reports. "The complaints are coming from a licensed electrical engineer with 15 years of experience in power systems design. Her analysis shows harmonic distortion levels that violate state electrical codes and pose risks to public safety. Over the next 6 hours, Santos and her team confirmed every problem that Sharon had identified. The power quality measurements were even worse than Sharon's reports had indicated, showing electrical disturbances that exceeded every safety standard by dangerous margins. "This is the worst electrical installation I've seen in 20 years of inspections," Santos told Kane as her team prepared their report. "Your systems are not only violating electrical codes, they're actively damaging equipment throughout the regional power grid." Kane made one last attempt to salvage the situation through intimidation. "Inspector, I think you should understand that direct tech brings significant economic benefits to this region. Shutting down our operations would cost hundreds of jobs and millions of dollars in tax revenue." Santos's expression was stone cold. "Mr. Kane, economic benefits don't override safety codes. Your electrical systems have already caused equipment failures that endangered hospital patients. That's not a risk I'm willing to accept for any amount of tax revenue." The shutdown order was issued at 4 p.m., requiring Direct Tech to disconnect from the power grid until they could demonstrate compliance with electrical codes and power quality standards. Kane's expensive consultants estimated that bringing the systems into compliance would cost over $2 million and take at least 6 months to complete. But the most devastating blow to Kane's reputation came from an unexpected source. Richardson, the young MIT engineer who had been struggling with problems he couldn't solve, requested a private meeting with Sharon to discuss the technical aspects of the electrical failures. "I need to understand what I did wrong," Richardson told Sharon as they reviewed the Direct Tech electrical plans in her workshop. "I designed these systems according to standard practices, but obviously I missed something critical." Sharon spread the electrical drawings across her workbench, pointing out the fundamental flaws that had caused the cascading failures. "The problem isn't with your calculations," she explained. "It's with the assumptions. You designed each system in isolation without considering how they would interact with each other or with the utility grid." Richardson studied the drawings with new understanding. "The VFD harmonics are interacting with the power factor correction equipment in ways that amplify the distortion instead of reducing it." "Exactly," Sharon replied. "And the neutral conductor sizing calculations don't account for the harmonic currents, so you have thermal buildup that leads to voltage distortion and equipment failures." For the next 3 hours, Richardson received an education in practical electrical engineering that his expensive degree program had never provided. Sharon explained the real-world considerations that textbooks rarely covered: how electrical systems behaved under stress, how harmonics propagated through power grids, and how seemingly minor design details could cause catastrophic failures. "Why didn't anyone teach me this in school?" Richardson asked, looking at electrical concepts he had never encountered despite years of formal education. "Because most professors learned from textbooks too," Sharon replied. "Real-world experience with complex electrical systems can't be taught in a classroom. It has to be earned through years of solving actual problems." Richardson made a decision that would cost him his consulting contract, but restore his professional integrity. He prepared a detailed technical report acknowledging the design flaws in DirectTech's electrical systems and recommending Sharon as the engineer most qualified to oversee the corrective work. "Mr. Kane isn't going to like this," Richardson warned as he prepared to submit his report. Sharon smiled. "Mr. Kane stopped liking things the moment he realized that competence doesn't always come with the credentials he expects." The report was submitted to the state electrical inspector, DirectTech's insurance company, and the various businesses and institutions that had suffered electrical damage. Richardson's acknowledgement of design flaws, combined with Sharon's technical documentation, created an overwhelming case for DirectTech's liability for the widespread electrical problems. Kane's response was swift and predictable. He fired Richardson, hired new consultants who were willing to dispute the findings, and launched a media campaign claiming that DirectTech was being unfairly targeted by local competitors who resented successful businesses. But the technical evidence was too strong to be overcome by public relations. Insurance companies began filing lawsuits to recover damages from equipment failures. The hospital demanded compensation for the additional costs of emergency generator operations and backup power systems. Local businesses started claiming reimbursement for electrical equipment that had been damaged by power quality problems. Within 2 weeks, DirectTech was facing over $10 million in liability claims, all stemming from electrical problems that could have been prevented with proper engineering practices that would have cost less than $50,000. Sharon watched these developments with mixed feelings. She felt vindicated by the recognition of her expertise and the acknowledgement that her warnings had been correct. But she also understood that Kane's downfall would have consequences for the community, including job losses and economic disruption that would hurt innocent people. The resolution, when it came, surprised everyone. The phoenix rises. The solution emerged from an unexpected conversation between Sharon and Dr. Martinez at the hospital. They were reviewing the costs of electrical repairs and upgrades needed to protect critical medical equipment when Dr. Martinez made an observation that changed everything. "You know," Dr. Martinez said as they studied the engineering estimates, "we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to protect ourselves from DirectTech's electrical problems. Meanwhile, they're spending millions to fix systems that never should have been built incorrectly in the first place." Sharon nodded, understanding the inefficiency of the situation. It would be cheaper and more effective to fix the problems at the source, rather than installing protective equipment throughout the community. "Could you design a proper electrical system for DirectTech?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Something that would eliminate the power quality problems while saving them money on the repairs?" Sharon considered the question carefully. The technical work would be straightforward. She could design electrical systems that would operate reliably while meeting all code requirements and power quality standards. But working with Kane would require navigating the ego and politics that had created the problems in the first place. "I could design systems that would solve all their electrical problems for about a quarter of what they're planning to spend on repairs," Sharon replied. "But Kane would never hire me after everything that's happened." Dr. Martinez smiled. What if Kane wasn't making the decision? The explanation came the following day, when Dr. Martinez called to inform Sharon that DirectTech's board of directors had voted to remove Kane as CEO. The electrical disasters, combined with the massive liability claims and regulatory shutdowns, had convinced the board that Kane's leadership was destroying the company. "They're looking for someone to design and oversee the electrical repairs," Dr. Martinez explained. "I recommended you as the most qualified engineer in the region." Sharon felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and caution. The DirectTech project would be the largest electrical engineering job she had handled since leaving her corporate career, and it would require her to work with many of the same consultants who had dismissed her expertise for months. But it would also be an opportunity to solve the electrical problems that were hurting her community, while demonstrating that competence mattered more than credentials or political connections. The interview with DirectTech's board was unlike any job interview Sharon had experienced. Instead of discussing her qualifications, the board members wanted to understand her analysis of the electrical problems and her recommendations for solutions. "Ms. Williams," said board chairwoman Patricia Foster, "we've reviewed your technical reports and Inspector Santos's findings. Can you fix our electrical systems and eliminate the power quality problems that are affecting the community?" Sharon spread the electrical drawings across the conference table, pointing out the specific problems and her recommended solutions. The fundamental issues are correctable, she explained. You need proper harmonic filtering, correctly sized neutral conductors, and coordination between your various electrical systems. The work can be completed in 3 months for about $1.8 million. Foster consulted her notes. Our previous consultants estimated 6 months and $4.2 million for the same work. Your previous consultants were trying to replace equipment that doesn't need to be replaced, Sharon replied. Most of your electrical infrastructure is fine. It just needs to be properly coordinated and protected. Board member James Wilson, who had been studying Sharon's credentials, asked the question that everyone was thinking. Ms. Williams, why are you working as a local electrician when you have the qualifications to work for major engineering firms? Sharon considered her answer carefully. I learned that competence and integrity don't always thrive in corporate environments. Sometimes the best work gets done by people who care more about solving problems than about protecting their political positions. The board voted unanimously to hire Sharon as DirectTech's chief electrical engineer, with authority to oversee all aspects of the electrical repairs and upgrades. The position came with a salary that was triple what she made as a local electrician. But more importantly, it came with the resources and authority to implement proper engineering solutions. Sharon's first decision was to rehire Richardson as her assistant engineer. The young MIT graduate had learned valuable lessons about the difference between textbook knowledge and practical experience, and Sharon believed he could become a competent engineer with proper mentoring. Are you sure about this? Richardson asked when Sharon offered him the position. I made some pretty serious mistakes with the original electrical design. You made mistakes because you didn't have enough experience to recognize the problems, Sharon replied. But you were willing to acknowledge those mistakes and learn from them. That's more valuable than perfect credentials. The electrical repairs proceeded smoothly under Sharon's direction. Working with local contractors who understood her standards and expectations, she was able to complete the project ahead of schedule and under budget. The new electrical systems not only eliminated the power quality problems that had plagued the community, but actually improved electrical service throughout the regional grid. Kane, meanwhile, had retreated to an executive position with a smaller company in another state. Industry sources reported that he was struggling to rebuild his reputation after the DirectTech disaster, particularly since technical analyses of the electrical failures had been published in engineering journals as cautionary examples of how not to design power systems. 6 months after the electrical crisis, Millfield's electrical systems were operating more reliably than they had in decades. The hospital's medical equipment functioned without interruption. Emergency services had dependable power, and local businesses were saving money on electrical costs due to improved power quality. Dr. Martinez invited Sharon to speak at a regional conference on electrical safety in healthcare facilities. Sheriff Bradley asked her to design a new emergency communication system that would be protected against power quality problems. Even Mrs. Henderson at the diner requested an electrical upgrade to support new kitchen equipment. But the most meaningful recognition came from the community itself. The Millfield Town Council voted to name Sharon as the town's official electrical engineer, a position that had never existed before, but seemed natural given her role in protecting critical infrastructure. Richardson, working under Sharon's mentorship, was developing into the kind of practical engineer who understood both theoretical principles and real-world applications. You've taught me more in 6 months than I learned in 4 years of college, he told Sharon as they completed the final testing of DirectTech's electrical systems. College teaches you how to solve textbook problems, Sharon replied. Real engineering is about solving problems that don't have textbook answers. As she watched Richardson work through a complex power quality analysis with confidence and competence, Sharon realized that she had found something more valuable than vindication or revenge. She had found a way to use her expertise to benefit her community while mentoring the next generation of engineers. The Millfield Electrical Cooperative, which Sharon had established to help local businesses install power conditioning equipment, had grown into a regional resource for electrical engineering services. Small towns throughout the area were hiring Sharon to assess their electrical infrastructure and protect critical systems from power quality problems. Full circle. 2 years after the DirecTech crisis, Sharon stood in her expanded workshop reviewing electrical drawings for a new hospital being built in the neighboring county. The project was large enough to require a team of engineers, and Sharon had recruited several talented professionals who shared her commitment to practical solutions over political maneuvering. Richardson had become her partner in the consulting business, combining his theoretical knowledge with the practical experience he had gained under Sharon's mentorship. Together, they had developed innovative approaches to electrical system design that were being adopted by engineering firms throughout the region. Sharon, Richardson called from his drafting table, the power company wants to schedule a meeting about the hospital's electrical service requirements. They're asking for our recommendations on grid integration and backup power systems. Sharon smiled as she reviewed Richardson's preliminary designs. His work showed the kind of careful attention to system interactions and real-world operating conditions that came from understanding both engineering principles and practical applications. The phone rang with a call from Dr. Martinez, who had become both a close friend and a frequent client, as Sharon's reputation for reliable electrical engineering had spread throughout the healthcare industry. "Sharon, I have a situation that requires your expertise, Doctor," Martinez said. "We're planning a major expansion of the ICU, and I want to make sure we have absolutely reliable electrical systems. Can you design something that will never fail?" "I can design systems that are as reliable as current technology allows," Sharon replied, "but the key is proper maintenance and regular testing. The best electrical design in the world won't help if people don't take care of it properly." This had become Sharon's standard approach: engineering systems that were robust and reliable, but also training clients to understand and maintain their electrical infrastructure properly. She had learned that sustainable solutions required both good design and competent management. The Millfield workshop had grown to include a testing laboratory that was better equipped than many university facilities. Sharon used the lab to analyze electrical problems for clients throughout the region, but she also opened it to local high school students who were interested in electrical engineering careers. One of those students, Maria Santos, no relation to the electrical inspector, had shown exceptional aptitude for understanding electrical systems. Sharon had been mentoring Maria for over a year, teaching her both theoretical principles and practical troubleshooting skills. "Ms. Williams," Maria said as she completed a complex power quality analysis, "I want to study electrical engineering in college. Do you think I'm smart enough for a program like Stanford?" Sharon looked at Maria's work, which showed the kind of careful analysis and creative problem solving that couldn't be taught from textbooks. "Maria, intelligence isn't about getting into prestigious schools. It's about understanding problems deeply enough to solve them effectively. You have that kind of intelligence." She handed Maria a recommendation letter that would help her gain admission to any engineering program in the country. "But remember that your education doesn't end when you graduate. The most important learning happens when you're solving real problems for real people." The success of Sharon's consulting business had attracted attention from major engineering firms that wanted to hire her for high-profile projects. The offers were tempting, with salaries and benefits that would have seemed impossible during her corporate exile. But Sharon had learned to measure success differently. She valued the trust of her community, the satisfaction of solving problems that mattered, and the opportunity to mentor young engineers who would carry forward the values of competence and integrity. When a Fortune 500 company offered her a vice president position with a salary in the mid-six figures, Sharon politely declined. "I've found work that lets me use my expertise to help people," she explained to the recruiter. "Money can't replace that kind of satisfaction." The annual Millfield Electrical Safety Conference, which Sharon had started as a way to share technical knowledge with local contractors, had grown into a regional event that attracted engineers and technicians from throughout the state. The conference focused on practical solutions to real-world problems, with an emphasis on protecting critical infrastructure and serving community needs. This year's keynote speaker was Inspector Maria Santos, who had become a close friend and professional colleague. Santos's presentation on electrical code enforcement and public safety drew upon lessons learned from the Direct Tech investigation. "The most important lesson from the Millfield case," Santos told the conference audience, "is that competence and credentials aren't the same thing. Real expertise shows itself through results, not diplomas or business cards." After the presentation, Santos approached Sharon with a proposal that would expand her influence beyond the local region. "Sharon, the state is looking for experienced engineers to serve on the Electrical Code Review Committee. Your background in both design and practical applications would be valuable for developing standards that actually work in the real world." Sharon considered the opportunity carefully. Serving on the Code Committee would allow her to influence electrical standards throughout the state, potentially preventing the kind of problems that had plagued Direct Tech and threatened public safety. "I'll do it," Sharon decided, "but only if the committee includes practicing electricians and maintenance technicians as well as engineers. The people who work with electrical systems every day understand problems that engineers in offices might miss." That evening, as Sharon closed her workshop after another productive day of solving electrical problems for her community, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from corporate exile to regional recognition. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led to work that combined technical challenge with meaningful purpose. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Richardson, who was attending an engineering conference in Chicago. "Presented our power quality research to the IEE Power Systems Society. 3 major universities want to collaborate on further research. Your reputation is spreading." Sharon smiled as she locked the workshop door. She had learned that reputation built on competence and integrity was more valuable and more durable than any amount of political connections or corporate influence. The lights of Millfield twinkled in the distance as Sharon drove home, powered by electrical systems that she had helped design and protect. The hospital's emergency rooms operated reliably. The fire station's communications never failed, and local businesses thrived with dependable electrical service. She had started as an invisible electrician, hiding from a past that had been destroyed by powerful people who confused authority with competence. She had become a respected engineer whose expertise protected critical infrastructure and whose mentorship was shaping the next generation of electrical professionals. But most importantly, Sharon had learned that true success wasn't measured by titles or salaries or recognition from prestigious institutions. It was measured by the problems solved, the people helped, and the knowledge passed on to those who would continue the work of making the world more reliable, more safe, and more fair. The circuit breaker had done its job, protecting the system by interrupting the flow of dangerous currents. Sometimes, Sharon reflected, the most important protection came not from the fanciest equipment or the most expensive consultants, but from the quiet competence of people who understood that doing the work right was more important than looking impressive while doing it wrong. As she turned into her driveway, Sharon felt the deep satisfaction that came from a life lived according to principles that couldn't be compromised or purchased. Tomorrow would bring new electrical problems to solve, new engineers to mentor, and new opportunities to prove that expertise and integrity were the only credentials that truly mattered. The workshop lights would come on again at 7 a.m., and Sharon Williams would be ready to tackle whatever challenges the day might bring. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most, and where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.